The alarm screamed at 4:30 a.m., cutting through the silence like a blade. Lillian's hand searched blindly for the snooze button, but she didn't have the luxury of 5 more minutes. Around her, bills sat like landmines on the nightstand, each one stamped with final warnings, shouting louder than her exhaustion ever could. With a groan, she rolled out of bed. Her husband, Adrienne, remained asleep, unbothered by the crisis they were drowning in. Lillian's body ached, her joints creaked, and yet there was no time for pain. 3 jobs. That was her reality now. The diner shift started soon, followed by scrubbing offices, then stocking shelves overnight. While Adrienne dreamed in comfort, she lived in endless motion. Her reflection in the mirror told the story clearly. Puffy eyes, dark circles, and a face that looked 2 decades older than her 32 years. Her once glowing skin had dulled into an exhausted gray. The only luxury left was a cup of black coffee, bitter and sugarless. She couldn't afford sweeteners anymore, not when her husband's debts loomed like shadows. As she poured the drink into a travel mug, her eyes caught on a brand new pair of sneakers near the door. Designer, untouched. She'd bought them with her tips because Adrienne said his friends mocked him for wearing cheap shoes. Her chest tightened with resentment. This wasn't the life she envisioned when she said, "I do." 5 years ago, Adrienne had been charming and ambitious. He painted pictures of a shared future, of prosperity and partnership. But those images dissolved the day Lillian discovered the truth. It was a Tuesday. She remembered because she'd come home early with plans to surprise him with his favorite dinner. Instead, she found him hunched over his laptop, panic dancing across his face. On the screen, online poker sites, a running tally of losses. $14,700 down the drain. Her stomach twisted as she realized this had been going on for months. He'd forged her signature on a credit card application. Her credit score was wrecked. "Adrienne, what the hell is this?" she had asked, her voice thin and cracking. His expression shifted from shock to guilt to anger in seconds. "I was trying to help us. I had a system," he insisted. "A system," she repeated, her voice rising with disbelief. "You call this mountain of debt a system? I'm out there breaking my back while you gamble away our future." The excuses tumbled out of him. He'd stop, he'd get help, he'd fix it. But Lillian had heard that song before. And while he slept that night without a care, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, something inside her hardening. Her forgiveness was wearing thin. By the next morning she had accepted a 3rd job. She told herself it was temporary, a way to dig them out. But the warehouse work was brutal. Her hands, already worn from waitressing and cleaning, bled from lifting boxes and handling sharp shelving. Her supervisor, Dale, was a hulk of a man with wandering eyes and cruel smiles. "Tougher than you look," he'd said on her first night, eyeing her up and down. "I like that in a woman." She ignored him. There wasn't room for anything but survival now. 3 hours of sleep became a luxury. Coffee replaced meals. Adrienne's constant texts, complaints about food, laundry, gas money, chipped at her spirit like water against stone. The breaking point came quietly, in the middle of her cleaning shift. Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman whose office she tidied twice a week, watched Lillian fold laundry with trembling hands. "Child," she said, placing a soft, wrinkled hand on her shoulder, "you look like death warmed over." Her words, though gentle, cracked something open inside Lillian. No one had asked her how she was in months. No one had cared to look. And so, for the first time, Lillian spoke. She told Mrs. Peterson everything. Adrienne's gambling, the mounting debt, the endless hours. She expected judgment. Instead, she received quiet, steady sympathy. When Lillian finally finished speaking, Mrs. Peterson took a breath and said something that would echo in her mind for days. "Baby girl," she said softly, "sometimes the people we love are the ones killing us slowest. You can't save a man who's determined to drown, especially not by drowning yourself." Lillian didn't reply. She couldn't. The truth sat too heavy in her chest. She finished the cleaning shift on autopilot, her ears still ringing with those words. That night, Adrienne brought her flowers, paid for with the grocery money she had left on the kitchen table. He was suddenly Mr. Redemption again, speaking in smooth tones about change, about recovery, about second chances. "I know I've messed up," Adrienne said, handing her the bouquet. "But I see how hard you're working. I've got interviews lined up. I'm really trying, Lillian." She nodded, too numb to argue. She wanted to believe him. God, she really did. Every now and then, she'd catch glimpses of the man she once loved, the man who used to rub her feet after long shifts, who made coffee before she got home. But the bills didn't lie. Her savings account was drained. Her credit cards maxed. Her cough wouldn't go away, and the pain in her lower back made sleep nearly impossible. Her life had become a battlefield, and Adrienne was both the landmine and the enemy. At one of Adrienne's recovery meetings, Lillian sat in the back, arms crossed. The stories other spouses told echoed her own. Promises, relapses, excuses, despair. Afterward, the meeting leader, Sharon, pulled her aside. "You can't love someone into sobriety," Sharon said gently. "And you sure as hell can't sacrifice yourself to save them." Her eyes were kind but firm. "You have to choose your own survival." Lillian wanted to believe she could still do both. But deep down, she knew the choice had already been made for her. It was survival or slow death. Stay or vanish. The moment that shattered everything came on a Thursday. Lillian had come home early from the diner, bones aching, ready to draw a hot bath, when she heard Adrienne's voice coming from the bedroom. He was on the phone, laughing, confident. "Man, you don't get it," he said. "My girl works 3 jobs to clean up my mess, cooks, cleans. She's basically my personal slave. Pays me for the privilege." Lillian froze in the hallway. Her breath hitched. "She's so scared of being alone, she'll do anything I say," Adrienne went on. "I tell her I'm in recovery, and she buys it. It's pathetic, really." Lillian slid down the wall, her knees giving out as her world collapsed around her. Adrienne's laughter echoed through the walls, but Lillian couldn't hear the rest. Her pulse roared in her ears like a drumbeat of betrayal. She sat motionless on the cold floor, shaking. 5 years of marriage, 3 jobs, endless nights, sacrificed dreams, and this was how he saw her. Not as a partner. Not as someone worth loving. Just a tool. Resource. A free laborer too scared to leave. That night, as Adrienne snored beside her, Lillian stared at the ceiling. But she wasn't crying. She was planning. The pain had stopped burning. It had turned into something sharp. Something ready. From that day forward, Lillian became methodical. Every night, she collected evidence. Screenshots of gambling apps, bank withdrawals, and suspicious messages. She found dating profiles he'd made. Photos of expensive items she hadn't seen in the house. Her husband had been living like a bachelor while she toiled like a servant. The more she uncovered, the less surprised she felt. It was as though her mind had known for months, but her heart refused to believe it. No more. Every file she saved was a brick in the wall she was building, one that would separate her from Adrienne forever. One afternoon, her phone buzzed with a message from her sister, Tamara. "You sound more tired every time we talk. When are you going to realize you deserve better than that man?" Tamara didn't know the whole truth. Lillian had hidden the gambling, the debt, the jobs. Shame kept her lips sealed. But that text stayed with her. It made something inside her shift. Later that night she opened her laptop. Divorce laws. Tenant rights. Financial abuse. Asset separation. She read and read, eyes burning, brain buzzing. She wasn't just hurt anymore. She was informed. And that made her dangerous. At 3 a.m., she made her first bold move. While Adrienne slept, she used his phone to take screenshots of his betting history and chats with bookies. She even found evidence of threats from creditors. Her heart beat fast, but her hands didn't shake. She knew now. He hadn't just betrayed her emotionally. He had put her in legal and financial danger. But he didn't see her coming. Adrienne had called her his slave. Blind to the strength he was feeding every day, she chose survival over collapse. What he didn't know was that she was no longer surviving. She was preparing to win. The last place Lillian expected to find support was inside an office building. But that's where she met Jerome Williams, the quiet accountant who worked late in the same place she cleaned. First it was just nods in passing. Then one evening as she emptied his trash he said gently, "Are you okay? You look like you're carrying the weight of the world." She blinked, stunned by the simple kindness. He wasn't flirting. His tone was too respectful. He was truly concerned. It had been so long since someone saw her, not just the bags under her eyes, but the person still buried beneath them. "I'm just working a lot," she said, offering her usual shrug. But Jerome wasn't fooled. "3 jobs, right? I've noticed." He smiled a little sheepishly. "I work late. Patterns stand out." Over the next few weeks, their exchanges deepened. Jerome shared that he was recently divorced. His ex-wife had been cheating, and he'd found out while reviewing their taxes. "Financial infidelity is still infidelity," he said one evening, as they stood by the office entrance. "Someone who hides money from you will hide anything." Lillian nodded slowly. He didn't know it yet, but he was helping her build the courage she needed. As their conversations continued, Jerome began offering advice. Legal tips, credit protection strategies, steps to separate assets before filing. But more than his expertise, it was his belief in her that meant the most. "You're not his slave," he told her. "And you're definitely not his mother. You're a woman with power. You just forgot it for a while." That night, Lillian sat on the edge of her bed, staring at Adrienne as he scrolled through his phone, completely unaware of the storm building around him. She had felt powerless for so long. But now she held the match, and everything was dry wood. The final piece of the puzzle arrived unexpectedly. She had borrowed Adrienne's tablet to research divorce attorneys when a notification popped up, an unread message on a dating app. Her stomach dropped. It was from a woman named Sweet Caramel 29, thanking Adrienne for their amazing date. Lillian's breath caught. She opened the app and saw everything. His full profile, recent pictures she had taken, lies about being single, financially stable, and emotionally available. Dozens of chats. Dozens of women. It was a digital museum of his deception, and now it was all hers. She scrolled through the messages with rising nausea. Expensive dinners she never ate. Hotels charged to her name. Gifts she never received. The worst was a woman named Jasmine. She and Adrienne had been dating for 3 months. He told her he was divorced. Said Lillian was a crazy ex who couldn't let go. In a single moment, her heartbreak crystallized into steel. She took screenshots of every message, every receipt. She wasn't heartbroken anymore. She was a strategist. She hadn't just been lied to, she'd been used. But she was done playing his fool. Now it was checkmate. The next day, Lillian crafted a plan. She started by messaging every woman Adrienne had fooled, every single one she could find. She began each message the same way. "I think we should talk." What followed was a storm. Jasmine, Monica, Crystal. 3 women who had believed his lies, just like she once had. One was a teacher. One was a nurse. One was a social worker. Each of them had been told the same story. Each of them had been taken for money, time, trust. Lillian didn't want revenge for herself. She wanted truth for all of them. And together they were going to take him down. Saturday morning arrived like a trap snapping shut. Adrienne strolled into a downtown cafe, expecting brunch with one of his latest flings. Instead, he found Lillian seated at a corner table, flanked by Jasmine, Monica, and Crystal. Each woman had a folder, printed messages, photos, bank statements. His smirk melted into horror. "Ladies," Lillian said calmly, "meet my husband. The man who told each of you he was single. The man who told me I was lucky to have him." Adrienne's charm, usually so slick, failed him. The walls of deceit he'd built around each woman collapsed all at once. Jasmine hurled her coffee at his chest. 3 months of lies," she screamed. Monica demanded her $2,000 loan back. Immediately. Crystal didn't raise her voice, but her words were sharper than knives. "You'll be hearing from the authorities," she said before walking out. Adrienne was stunned, sputtering excuses, but no one listened. When the other women left, Lillian stayed seated, her hands steady as she slid 2 papers across the table. Divorce documents and a copy of a restraining order. "Sign them," she said. "Or I'll send this evidence to your family, your job, and every friend you've ever lied to." Adrienne's mask cracked. He grabbed her wrist hard, whispering through gritted teeth, "You're ruining my life." Lillian didn't flinch. "No," she said. "I'm taking mine back." Her voice was cold, her eyes unblinking. "Remember, I'm your personal slave. Pathetic and desperate. But not anymore." She stood and walked out, leaving him behind in that cafe with nothing but his broken game and bitter coffee cooling on his shirt. The woman who once clung to hope was gone. The woman who replaced her had nothing left to lose, and everything to gain. Adrienne retaliated fast and dirty. Within hours of being served, he drained their joint account, maxed out every credit card, and changed the locks on their apartment. When Lillian returned from work, she found herself locked out of her own home. She called the police and stood under the porch light with her dignity clenched tight while officers retrieved her things. He thought he'd won a battle. What he didn't know was that she had already won the war by preparing for every blow. Jerome helped her open a new bank account, transferring what little money she could salvage. Mrs. Peterson offered Lillian a spare bedroom, refusing to accept a dime. "You saved my house from dust. Let me save you from him," she said with a warm smile. Tamara flew in from across the country, arriving with a suitcase full of support and fire. "We're not letting that man take another piece of you," she said. They created a fortress of love around Lillian, legal, emotional, and practical. With Jerome's financial knowledge and the fierce lawyer Patricia Monroe on her side. Lillian was ready. The courtroom wasn't just a legal arena, it became a battlefield for her freedom. The case was brutal. Patricia presented everything: gambling losses, fake dating profiles, stolen money, evidence of financial abuse. Jasmine, Monica, and Crystal gave testimony. Adrienne, now stripped of his facade, looked small and panicked. Lillian sat silently beside Patricia, wearing a plain navy dress and no makeup. Her face, tired but calm, was a testament to every sleepless night and every sacrifice. Patricia's voice cut through the courtroom like a scalpel. "My client worked 3 jobs to clean up debts she never created. She was manipulated, defrauded, and emotionally enslaved. This isn't just divorce. This is liberation." Adrienne's lawyer tried to paint Lillian as unstable, claiming she was having a breakdown. But the evidence was overwhelming. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for theatrics, saw through it immediately. "I've read the statements," she said, flipping through the files. "What I see here is a clear pattern of deception and exploitation. This is not a woman losing her mind. This is a woman reclaiming her life." Adrienne slumped in his chair. The courtroom was no longer his stage. It was her arena, and every truth was a spotlight burning him down. The final hearing landed on a cold November morning, 7 months to the day since Lillian had heard Adrienne's betrayal through the bedroom door. Adrienne looked gaunt. His once tailored clothes now hung loose. Addiction and consequence had taken their toll. The judge issued a ruling that felt like divine justice. Adrienne was held responsible for all marital debts related to gambling. He would receive no alimony, no settlement, and no share of Lillian's future income or property. The lease on their apartment was transferred to Lillian alone, and a restraining order was made permanent. The judge didn't stop there. "Mr. Thompson," she said, voice steady and cold, "you will enter a court-approved treatment program for gambling addiction. You will provide monthly proof of attendance. Failure to comply will result in arrest. This court recognizes financial abuse as a serious form of domestic violence." Adrienne tried to protest, but no one listened. He was a man exposed, stripped of all masks. Lillian turned to him one last time, not with anger, but with calm clarity. "I believed your lies once," she said. "And it nearly destroyed me. But that woman is gone. I don't believe you anymore." As she walked out of the courtroom that day, Lillian didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just breathed, a full, deep breath, the kind she hadn't taken in years. Adrienne called after her one last time, his voice cracking. "Lillian, wait. We can fix this. I'll change." She paused, turned back only for a moment. "You said I was pathetic and desperate," she replied. "You were right. But not anymore." She walked away without a single glance back. The chains he had wrapped around her heart were broken. The man who called her a slave had no hold on her anymore. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Lillian's life no longer resembled the one she had clawed her way out of. The sleepless nights were over. She had quit 2 of her 3 jobs, keeping only the diner position, the one she actually enjoyed. The early morning customers became her second family, tipping generously and sharing kind words that reminded her she was seen. For the first time in years, she had evenings to herself. No bruised muscles. No stress-induced migraines. No texts from Adrienne demanding gas money. Just quiet. Just peace. Jerome became more than a friend. It happened slowly, as healing things often do. There were no grand declarations. Just honest conversations, shared dinners, gentle check-ins. He never pushed. Never pressured. He knew she needed time to rediscover who she was before belonging to anyone else. "You've got fire in you now," he said one evening as they strolled through the park. "Not the kind that burns to survive. The kind that warms and builds." Lillian didn't reply. She just smiled. 'Cause he was right. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was living. With Jerome's encouragement and her own growing confidence, Lillian enrolled in evening business classes at the local community college. She had always dreamed of opening a catering business but never dared believe she could. Now every class felt like a doorway flung wide open. She scribbled notes feverishly, sat in the front row, and stayed after to ask questions. Each lesson was a stone in the foundation of something new. Something hers. It wasn't about Adrienne anymore. It was about Lillian. About rising. About claiming her space in the world. Mrs. Peterson, still sharp and sweet as ever, became a mentor of sorts, cheering Lillian on during weekly dinners. "That man thought he could break you," she said, sipping her tea. "But all he did was show you how strong you really are." Tamara, now a frequent visitor, marveled at her sister's transformation. "You used to whisper like life had beaten the volume out of you," she said during one visit. "Now you walk like the floor belongs to you." Lillian chuckled but knew it was true. Her spine was straighter now. Her voice firmer. Her heart lighter. The trauma didn't vanish overnight. Some days she still checked her bank balance 3 times before buying groceries. Trust, even with Jerome, was something she rebuilt brick by cautious brick. But the fear no longer ruled her life. Those scars had become maps, proof of where she'd been, not where she was going. Lillian had a plan now. Whisk and Whimsy Soul Food. A catering business rooted in comfort dishes, joy, and the tenacity of a woman who once served others while starving herself, physically and emotionally. Her vision was clear. Her hands, once worn and raw, were ready to create again. A year after leaving Adrienne, Lillian stood inside her own kitchen, her own business. Whisk and Whimsy Soul Food was alive and bustling. She had hired 3 part-time staff members, each one treated with kindness and respect. They prepped for a wedding reception that would serve 200 guests. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was feeding a celebration of love, not bitter from her past but wiser for it. The woman who once scrubbed offices at midnight now oversaw a team, managed orders, and balanced spreadsheets with the skill of a seasoned entrepreneur. The community embraced her. Word of mouth about her food spread like wildfire. Flaky meat pies, spiced jollof rice, sweet plantain tarts. Even the local paper took notice. One crisp morning, her phone buzzed with a message from Tamara. "Saw the article. Front page of the business section, sis. You've come so far. The headline made her tear up. From 3 jobs to thriving. How one woman built an empire from ashes. The article didn't dive into the gory details of her past. Focused on her strength, her journey, her joy. That was the story she wanted told. Adrienne had tried to contact her several times throughout the year. He called from unknown numbers, sent emails begging for another chance, even claimed he was homeless. She didn't respond. She'd blocked every number. Moved without sharing her new address. According to mutual acquaintances, he was still jobless, still gambling, still blaming everyone but himself. Lillian felt nothing. Not anger. Not sympathy. Just distance. He was no longer part of her story. He had become a page she'd turned and would never flip back to. On a warm Sunday evening, Lillian stood at the back of her catering truck, handing a bride her boxed-up leftovers with a wide smile. The woman hugged her and said, "You didn't just feed us, you made this day magical." As the truck drove off, Jerome appeared with a thermos of tea. "You look like a boss today," he teased. "Correction," Lillian replied, stretching her arms. "I am a boss." He chuckled and handed her the tea. She leaned into his shoulder and looked up at the dusky sky. Freedom tasted better than anything she'd ever cooked. That night, she lit a candle on her kitchen counter, not in mourning but in remembrance. Not of Adrienne, but of the woman she used to be. The one who stayed quiet, who thought love meant sacrifice without return, who believed endurance was the same as loyalty. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude. For Mrs. Peterson's wisdom, for Tamara's love, for Jerome's presence, and most of all for herself. For not giving up. For choosing herself. For rebuilding. She didn't need a fairy tale ending. She had something better, her own voice. Her own path. Her own power. In the weeks that followed the big wedding event, business at Whisk and Whimsy Soul Food picked up faster than Lillian anticipated. She found herself fielding calls from corporate offices, birthday clients, bridal showers, and even local politicians. People didn't just come for the food. They came for the atmosphere she created, one where respect, joy, and passion simmered in every pot. She made it a rule. No one on her team worked overtime without rest. No cutting corners. No exploitation. She'd lived that life and vowed never to recreate it for someone else. Jerome remained a steady presence. Not just in her business life, but her personal healing too. He supported her without hovering, encouraging her dreams while respecting her boundaries. Some nights, after long shifts, they'd sit on the back steps of her building, sipping tea and watching the stars. "You know," he said once, "if anyone deserves the word resilient, it's you." She smiled, then corrected him gently. "I don't want to be resilient forever. I want to be happy, peaceful, whole." And with every passing day, she got closer to that version of herself. Her evenings became sacred. Some nights she journaled, writing down affirmations, goals, reflections. Other nights she simply rested. She learned to say no without guilt, to set boundaries without apology. Therapy helped too, unpacking the trauma that lingered like smoke after a fire. Her therapist once said, "You don't just survive abuse. You unlearn the lies it planted." That line stuck with her. Adrienne had once made her feel small, incapable, desperate. But now she saw herself clearly. A woman who had risen from the ashes without anyone's permission. One day, while organizing the business files in her office, she found a small box she'd packed the day she left Adrienne. Inside were old documents, including the notebook where she'd tracked every penny he'd spent, every gamble he placed. She stared at the worn pages for a long time. Then she took them outside, dropped them into a metal bin, and lit a match. The fire crackled and consumed each line of pain. She watched the ashes dance into the wind, a soft smile forming on her lips. That chapter was over, and this time it stayed closed. She later created something new. An art wall inside her shop. Customers began contributing. quotes, photos, pieces of encouragement for anyone going through hard times. She called it the reclaim wall. In the center, she hung a framed photo of herself holding a tray of steaming egusi soup, eyes lit with pride. Underneath it, she hand-lettered the words, "Not a survivor, a rebuilder." People asked about the wall. Some cried reading the notes. Others left their own. It became more than decoration. It was testimony. And Lillian's story was no longer one of shame, but one of power and truth. Word of the reclaim wall spread throughout the city. Local women's groups started hosting monthly dinners at Whisk and Whimsy. Survivors of financial and emotional abuse gathered there, not just for meals but for solidarity. Lillian spoke at a few of these events, not as a victim, but as someone who had walked the dark path and come out wiser. "There's no shame in loving the wrong person," she once told a young woman. "The shame is staying once you know who they are. And even then, shame has no home here. Only truth." One evening, a woman named Clara visited the shop. Her hands trembled as she ordered tea. She glanced at the wall and then at Lillian. "I know who you are," she said softly. "I read your story in the journal. I'm where you were." Lillian didn't pry. She simply poured the tea, handed over a warm plate of jollof rice and dodo, and said, "Sit. Rest." Later, Clara added her own note to the wall. "I thought I was broken. Turns out I'm just getting started." Lillian read it quietly, her heart swelling. The ripple of her healing was now healing others. She received an award that year, Local Woman of Impact, presented by the mayor himself. Tamara flew in for the ceremony, tears gleaming in her eyes as Lillian stepped on stage. "To think," Tamara whispered. "He once called you a slave. Now look who you are." Lillian held the plaque but knew the real reward was not the applause. It was the quiet dignity she had earned. The way she now looked in the mirror without flinching. The way she took up space without apology. The way she slept peacefully, knowing she owed no one her silence ever again. Adrienne's name never crossed her lips anymore. He became a ghost of a life she no longer recognized. Occasionally, people mentioned they'd seen him, still chasing luck, still blaming the world. But he no longer had power. He had become irrelevant. Lillian didn't need revenge. She had something stronger, indifference. She had transformed every wound he gave her into wisdom, every insult into strength, every scar into a stepping stone. That kind of healing was irreversible, unshakable. She had built a fortress from the very bricks he threw at her. That Christmas, Lillian hosted a community dinner at Whisk and Whimsy. She wore a vibrant yellow dress, her afro wrapped in a gold-patterned scarf. Children laughed, candles flickered, and music floated through the air. Jerome danced with Mrs. Peterson. Tamara passed out dessert trays. Lillian stood at the center of it all, surrounded by light, love, and laughter. And in that moment, she realized something important. She was no longer surviving her past. She was fully living her future. A future she built, not for anyone else but for herself. After the holiday dinner, Lillian sat alone in the quiet kitchen, sipping ginger tea while the last of the dishes soaked in the sink. The room smelled of cinnamon and roasted peppers. Her body was tired, but it was a good kind of tired, earned, satisfied. She looked around at the twinkling lights, the handwritten affirmations pinned to the reclaim wall, and the bouquet of sunflowers Jerome had surprised her with that morning. In her heart there was no longing, no regret, just warmth. She had everything she needed, and what she no longer had, she didn't miss. She thought back to that version of herself, the girl who whispered instead of speaking, who flinched every time her husband sighed too loud, who apologized just for needing rest. That girl had walked through fire. And even though she hadn't come out untouched, she had come out transformed. Sometimes, Lillian wondered how she lasted as long as she did with Adrienne. How she didn't break under the weight of the debt, the manipulation, the betrayal. But now she knew the answer. She hadn't been weak. She had been loyal. Too loyal to someone who never deserved it. In her business classes, she was now the one mentoring others, women juggling kids, jobs and dreams. "It's okay to start scared," she told them. "Just don't stay there." They listened because her voice carried experience, authority, survival. One classmate asked if she ever missed her old life. Lillian paused for a moment and then smiled. "I miss the woman I could have been sooner," she said. "But I'm not late. I'm just on time now." And she meant every word. Growth doesn't follow a clock. Healing doesn't obey a schedule. But truth always arrives right when it's needed. Her catering business expanded into a second kitchen the following year. She hired young women from underprivileged backgrounds, training them in culinary skills and financial literacy. "You're not just here to cook," she told them during orientation. "You're here to learn how to stand on your own." One of them, a shy girl named Amaka, reminded Lillian of herself. Quiet, watchful, but with a fire in her hands. "You're going to do something big one day," Lillian told her after her first big event. Amaka looked surprised. No one had said that to her before. But now someone had. And it would change everything. Late one night, after a full day of catering a graduation party, Lillian and Jerome lay on the couch, surrounded by the soft hum of contentment. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "I know I've said it before, but I'm proud of you." She rested her head on his chest and replied, "I'm proud of me too." That was the biggest difference. Not the business. Not the freedom. Not even the love. It was the pride. The ownership of her own becoming. For so long, her identity had been wrapped in Adrienne's chaos. Now it was wrapped in her own power. The old fears visited occasionally. Odd times, like when a bank statement looked strange or a bill arrived late. Her body would tense, expecting betrayal. But then she'd breathe, remind herself where she was, and who she was. Those shadows didn't scare her anymore. They just reminded her how far she'd come. Every scar was a map of survival. Every wrinkle around her eyes a testament to laughter that returned after years of silence. She wasn't chasing perfection. She was embracing her imperfect, extraordinary, rebuilt life. One morning, she stood at the front window of Whisk and Whimsy, holding a warm mug of cocoa and watching the sunrise. The light spilled across the hardwood floors like a blessing. A couple passed by holding hands, smiling, caught in a private joke. Lillian didn't feel envy. She felt peace. She had love, real, quiet, unwavering love. She had her purpose. Her voice. Name. She was no longer Adrienne's wife, or the woman who stayed. She was Lillian. Builder of businesses. Survivor of storms. Teller of truth. And nobody could take that away from her. Tamara visited again in the spring and brought a surprise. A framed copy of the newspaper article, now slightly yellowed at the corners. Lillian laughed and hung it in her office. Not to gloat, but to remember. To honor the fire that had once burned everything to the ground, and the woman who had used the ashes to plant seeds. "Every time I think about what you went through," Tamara said, "I just want to scream at the old you to run." Lillian nodded. She couldn't hear you then. But she hears you now. The final piece of healing came not with a bang, but a whisper. One night, alone, she sat on her bed and said the words out loud. "I forgive you, Adrienne. Not for his sake, but for hers." She didn't excuse him. She didn't forget. But she released the weight. The anger. The need for revenge. She let it float into the air like smoke from a candle's flame. And in that letting go, she felt her heart expand. Forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. It meant freedom. True, irreversible, soulful freedom. And so, the woman who once worked herself to the edge of death for a man who called her a slave became her own liberator. Not with violence. Not with vengeance. But with purpose. With courage. With love, starting with herself. As she walked through her bustling kitchen, laughing with her staff, stirring a pot of rich stew, she looked up at the photo on the reclaim wall. Not a survivor. A rebuilder. The words weren't just decoration. They were her legacy. Her testimony. Her truth. And every bite of food she served carried it forward. Seasoned with strength, served with joy.